Today, on A Word on Westerns, Phil Proctor.
We're all standing around getting ready to do the shot, and suddenly Fess cuts an enormous fart. Really stopped everything. It's like the bells went off, ring, ring, on the soundstage, you know, and the sound man was going like, ow. And so he takes off his coonskin cap, and he throws it down on the soundstage floor, and he stomps on it. He says, damn raccoon, a damn raccoon. It was then that I knew I was going to have fun on this shoot, and I really did.
Welcome to A Word on Westerns, where we talk to the greatest Western creators of yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
That's right, boys and girls, it's time for laughs on A Word on Westerns because we have Phil Proctor from the Firesign Theater. And I know you're thinking, they did Westerns? Well, actually, yes, they did.
And it's a super normal Western where it's very easy to follow the whole time and there's no drugs at all.
Well, it is abby-normal. It's ZACHARIAH starring Don Johnson.
And John Rubinstein?
Yes.
Who was PIPPIN.
Yes, he was. Broadway stars. And it was quite something because I remember listening in the dark to all of these different albums that had come out. They were the first audio comedy team comparable to
Saturday Night Live? Monty Python.
And it was unusual. I know Stan Freberg had done some great records earlier, and there were monologists like Bob Newhart and Johnny Winters and stuff. But the Firesign Theater was a hipper album for a younger demographic like I was at the time. One of the great albums, Don't Crush That Dwarf, Hand Me the Pliers. Who remembers that? Well, you may or you may not, but I know you're going to really like listening to Phil Proctor.
He was just such a fun guest, and I hadn't realized all of his voice acting credits that he had amassed over the years before this interview initially, and then he just started doing some of the voices, and it really blew me away.
Well, he was a hyena in The Lion King. He was in Toy Story and so many others.
The drunk monkey in Dr. Dolittle.
And also a rampaging elephant in Tarzan. Lots and lots of stuff. But the stories about ZACHARIAH and how that psychedelic Western came to be is fascinating. And because we were with a live audience, Phil knew how to work that audience.
He sure
and he also
did.
goes into the origins, how Firesign Theater got together, how he made the trek to Los Angeles and the riots were going on. It's an interesting story that leads into this, I guess we'd call it a disastrous Western.
Yeah, a psychedelic, disastrous Western extravaganza.
Well, I remember going to see it with a group of long-haired hippies, and we were in tune with the movie. I even have a one-sheet of the film. It was a lot of fun. A lot of it didn't work, but it was radical, and some of the music, Country Joe and the Fish, the James Gang, nice music. I have the soundtrack album, too. But let's get into Phil's story, because it's a fascinating, funny adventure with Phil from the Firesign Theater joining us for A Word on Westerns. Traditional Westerns are something that a lot of us grew up with. When you think about non-traditional Westerns, Blazing Saddles is the first thing I think of. But there are some others, and we used to call them acid Westerns, trippy Westerns. But the real term, I guess, the appropriate and accepted term, is a counterculture Western. And one I remember seeing starred Don Johnson and John Rubinstein, and it was written by the Firesign Theater. The film was called ZACHARIAH, and George England directed it, and it was strange, but it had some beautiful slow motion in it, had music, it had Belle Starr like you've never seen her before. We have one of the authors, and he also had a part in it. He's got some great stories, Mr. Phil Proctor.
Thank you very much. I really feel like a fish out of water in this wonderful surroundings. But I got some stories. I never got to do a Western movie per se, except for this crazy project, ZACHARIAH. Now, ZACHARIAH, we were hired because I guess we were known for our, by then for a surrealistic sense of humor. So that was the era where we were asked to work with this director, Joe Massot, who had done a film called Wonderwall with music by George Harrison, and for some reason had been brought over from England to create this movie, which was going to be the first psychedelic Western. A Western based on the story of SIDDHARTHA, and you know, representing two guys who become expert gunslingers, but one of them is good and one of them is bad. Although I defy you when you see this movie to tell me exactly how that happened. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. How is it that Don Johnson kind of is dressed in black, you know, and John Rubinstein is dressed in white? Well, when we worked with Joe writing this thing in offices that ABC owned on Vine, we wanted it to be a standard Western with psychedelic and surrealistic aspects to it, so that you think you're watching, like Blazing Saddles, you think you're watching something traditional, but strange things are happening, and it's happening kind of in the modern world as well. Massot wanted to cast as Belle Starr Brigitte Bardot, and he wanted to cast as the lead ZACHARIAH, John Rubinstein's part, Bob Dylan. Okay, and that's where we kind of came on board. Brigitte Bardot, Bob Dylan, sign me up, you know. So, well, it went through a slight transformation when Massot quit the movie. And our producer, George England, known for such projects as The Shoes of the Fisherman, you know, he became our director. So suddenly this script that we're working on, which was quite zany and psychedelic and involved like a shootout between two guys where the bullets were slowing down because of their minds and were coming like very slow, you know, like a CGI movie with no CGI. You know, how are we going to do it? I don't know. But we wrote all this great stuff. And then George took over and he kept saying, write the scene where ZACHARIAH tells his father he's leaving the ranch and is going to go out on his own. Why? Because we want to know his motivation. So we wrote that scene so many times, and we'd go in and he'd read it, you know, and he was the father, you know, he'd read it and he'd go, no, not yet. And we spent all of our time doing that. And while we were doing that, the movie got away from us. It just went somewhere. So by the time we all, the three of us, Phil Austin didn't want to go, but Dave Ossman, Peter Bergman, myself went down to Mexicali, where we were going to shoot the thing on the Laguna Salada near Mexicali, and we went down to put the finishing touches on the script. Well, we went out to see the sets one day, and the sets are totally surrealistic. They're like big cutouts, you know? It's just totally not at all real, beyond realism, not even surrealism, subrealism, you know? And as we drove out there, George England was married to Cloris Leachman. And of course, we were hippies and we were fueled by pot. And we had got some great some great Mexican grass called la alfombra, something like the carpet. I don't know. We were smoking the carpet. It was great. and we we were on the floor most of the time. So Cloris had never smoked before. So while we're driving out to this location, we turned Cloris on, and she took off like a skyrocket. The next thing we know, she divorced George and won an Oscar. So legalized.
Clues movie, The Last Picture Show.
The Last Picture.
Yes.
How about that? So anyway, as we're driving out, now this is a desert and it's flat. There's a beautiful mountains, you know, those Western locations, the best in Mexico, Canada, you know, good old America. Anyway, the Wild West, anywhere but in America. They used to do it in America, but not. Okay. So we're driving out there and there's a crossroad in the desert where two roads are intersecting. And as we come up to the crossroad, we notice that there's been an accident. Two cars have run into one another at the crossroads. And there are two guys standing outside their cars arguing, two Mexican guys. Two guys were driving towards one another or, you know, side on the crossroads, and neither one of them was going to stop and let the other one go through. And they had an accident. So we go out, we see these sets, and we go like, oh boy, this is not the movie we wrote, but we wrote a movie, you know, and we got our bananas Foster every night at the hotel. So, you know, the next day they were going to do the first shot, which was the Crackers, played by Country Joe and the Fish, was an inept gang of stage robbers and crooks. They were going after a stagecoach, and the gag was that the stagecoach outruns them. Fine, it works, it's in the movie, but the way that we designed the gag was that the stagecoach makes a sharp turn in this one little canyon, and the gang can't stop in time, right? And rides up the hill. I mean, it can't make the turn. Rides up a hill and finds themselves isolated on the top of a mesa. So they prepared the hill, and, you know, built it all, and laid the shots out and everything. The next morning, they go out to shoot the thing, and the Mexican crew had bulldozed the hill. There, you can't shoot because there's a hill there. We got rid of the hill. Now you can shoot, you see. So the gag looks different in the movie. In general, what happened to that film was it became a film about why ZACHARIAH left his father behind. It became, in a strange way, a gay movie. When you see it, first of all, they cast these two beautiful young men, wonderful actors, Don Johnson, John Rubinstein. John Rubinstein was Pippin on Broadway, you know, both very, very handsome, young, skinny guys. So all of the stuff that's written about love, you know, like, you know, the hippie friendship and all that kind of stuff became kind of like, oh, love, hippie friendship, nice jacket.
Play with my fringe.
And the whole trajectory of the movie kind of changed. So it's a movie of mixed blessings. There's some great music in it. Dick Van Patten speaks some lines that I wrote from a character called Ralph Spoilsport that I created quite wonderfully. And every once in a while, there's a little flash of the surreal reality of the way what the movie could have been.
Were you given a part in it also?
So I'm a priest in one little scene, and Bergman plays a bank teller, and he's being held up and everything. But it was a movie that took a funny twist into an entirely different thing. Believe me, all of us who've worked in films, either as an actor or as a producer or a director, you know the movies can go in quite a crazy direction and not at all what you signed up for.
Tell us about Daniel Boone.
Yeah.
There was one that he did.
I was cast as a French chef who had to pretend he was the King of France in Boone's Barrel. And it was a great script and a great little part for me. And of course, the first day I worked with Fess Parker, the great Fess Parker, we were in the stagecoach, in a sound stage, in a stagecoach. Rosie Greer was knitting, I remember. You know, anybody worked that show? Rosie would knitted between scenes. And Fess we're all standing around getting ready to do the shot. And suddenly Fess cuts an enormous fart. Really stopped everything. It was like the bells went off, ring, ring, on the soundstage, you know, and the sound man was going like, ow, whoa. And so he takes off his coonskin cap and he throws it down on the soundstage floor, and he stomps on it. He said, "Damn raccoon! A damn raccoon!" It was then that I knew I was going to have fun on this shoot, and I really did. So anyway, the reason that I got involved with the Firesign Theater in the first place, which is a 4-man satirical comedy group, Monty Python before Monty Python. Okay. Yeah. One of our records is in the Library of Congress. Don't crush that dwarf. Hand me the pliers. That says it all. Well, when I was a kid, I grew up also in New York, East 78th Street. I went to Alan Stevenson School, which had a great orchestra. I learned to play the fiddle there. And I did female roles in Gilbert and Sullivan productions, normal kind of New York upbringing. And I think, who is it? The New York culture, right? New York culture. I was part of that. So anyway, one of my teachers was a best friend of Helen Hayes, fabulous actress. And I was a child actor. And she asked me if I would understudy Brandon DeWilde in a Broadway play that she was doing called Mrs. McThing, which is about a witch boy. And although I was talented, I was shy. And I said no, so I didn't do it. Many years later, I understudied Brandon DeWilde in a play by Evan Hunter called A Race of Hairy Men, which was a counterculture play. And it was about as successful as that movie. And Brandon and I became immediate bosom buddies. We just became the greatest of pals. And he decided to resuscitate his film career by going out to Hollywood. And we drove out to California together. And of course, he's best known for Shane, the role of the boy. Shane, come back, Shane. Right. And he connected up with Peter Fonda, of all people, when we got out to California. And Peter was researching a little film that he called Captain America. But of course, Marvel Comics wouldn't give him the rights to use Captain America. So he thought for a minute, and actually it was Terry Southern who suggested the title Easy Rider. And you know what an Easy Rider is? Yeah.
So it's rolling paper, isn't it?
No. An Easy Rider is the boyfriend of a prostitute who's living off of her earnings. He's an easy rider. So anyway, Peter decided to go to the Sunset Strip to do some research on this movie, which is about the counterculture, the young culture, the emerging culture. And so we went down on an evening when they were going to try to impose a curfew on the young people on the Sunset Strip. This is 66, 64, maybe 65. And so there were thousands and thousands of kids all gathered together. This is in the 60s. So it's, it was the kind of a nice haze of pot smoke everywhere. And, we're all out in the street, and they had the LA police on one end of the Sunset Strip and the sheriffs on the other. And of course, it's the classic pincer movement. They push the crowd together, create a riot, and then beat the everybody. So at one point, they're all saying, unlawful, I declare this unlawful, declare this. And so we all sat down. So we all sat down, and I sat down on an open issue of the LA Free Press. And I pulled it out from under my ass, and there was a picture that I was sitting on. And it said, KPFK newsman Peter Bergman interviews returning war veterans from the Vietnam War. And I said, well, I went to Yale with Peter Bergman. And he's now on KPFK, which is the great underground station at that time. And so I said, well, I'll call in the next day. Well, the next thing that happened was, of course, Peter got beaten up. Brandon got arrested. I was writing for for the East Village Other at the time in New York. And I had a press card, which had a big eye on it. And I held up my card as the cops started, moving in on us and said, press, press, press. And they just flowed around me like a hot knife through butter. It was great. So the next day I called up Peter Bergman, and I said, what are you doing? He says, I'm the Wizard of Oz. I said, I know, but what are you doing? He had this show, this counterculture talk show called Radio Free Oz, which was on from like midnight to 3 in the morning on KPFK. And he said, come on down, we'll play on the radio. So I went down, Indeed, we improvised on the radio, and I met these two other guys, David Ossman and Phil Austin, who were both working at the station. And we all started playing together. It was like word jazz. We all had this surreal comic mind that we shared, you know, and we started creating characters. And I remember we discovered we were all fire signs. I'm a Leo. There were two Sagittarians and an Aries. Unfortunately, an Aries is stubborn. And that was awesome. Anyway, and we found that we could improvise well together. We did a thing called the Oz Film Festival, where we showed movies on the radio. And well, it's possible. And Phil Austin, he was doing what he called the movies for the bedroom. They were adult films. And this is, you know, early in the mid-'60s, before pornography became, you know, totally available to anybody but Fred Willard, who said, some of you remember that. Sorry. So anyway.
Mary's going to hear about that.
Mary hears about everything. So anyway, he shows his movie on the air. You know, it's called Blondie Pays the Rent. That was the name of the movie. And we got a call from someone saying, "You can't show dirty movies on the radio." And we went, "Oh, we got something going here." You know? So we started Bergman actually created the Oz Firesign Theater. And then we got our first record contract, and Disney sent us a letter saying, "You can't use the name Oz because we own the rights to it. We're putting out a movie called Return to Oz, animated feature, and you can't have it." We should have said, "Well, we're all Australian. I mean, we're Aussies. You see, Oz Firesign Theater. You can't take it away from us. You know, get out of here. Go f yourself." But no, it's, we knew that it was confusing enough to be the Firesign Theater. What does that mean? So we just said, okay, let's go with that. And we had this 50-year career, which is one of the reasons why I didn't get to have as much fun as you guys did in the wonderful world of movie land. We'd had a couple of hit records. Our records, will tell you everything. First one was called Waiting for the Electrician or Someone Like Him. The second one was called How Can You Be in Two Places at Once When You're Not Anywhere at All?
That was my favorite.
Yeah. And the flip side of that was Nick Danger, Third Eye. Yeah. You stupid fools! Don't implant for danger, you idiots! I was Rocky Rococo, the villain in that one. And that was the one that really resonated with the nation, because we were parodying old detective radio shows and movies, and everybody could understand that. And so, but we were taking it way out and going really crazy. We invented the long form comedy album, which was multi-layered with music and sound effects and Foley and Walla and multiple stories. And like the Pythons, we did all of the voices, you know, ourselves and everything. Although we also brought women into it and had singing and music with women, wives, particularly wives. So anyway, and then the next one was called Don't Crush That Dwarf, Hand Me the Pliers. And that's the one that really caught it. That's the one that's in the Library of Congress right now. That was a parody of television, watching television. And we kind of invented the idea of a remote control so we could go from one cut to another. Just take people on a surrealistic journey through a television set that told a complicated and multi-layered story that had a plot that ended up. And we also had the guy watching the television who would fall asleep in front of it and dream himself into the scenes. And he was also an old actor at this point, and he was watching his old movies on television. You see, High School Madness is one of his films. So it was a wonderful opportunity to really get into the concept of entertainment, media, and how media was changing the way we all think and how advertising was changing. It was very successful. And then the next one was called I Think We're All Bozos on This Bus. And later in my career, I did a lot of voiceover work, and I was doing voices for Pixar movies, the early ones, Toy Story and Finding Nemo and Monsters Incorporated and everything. And I got to meet Steve Jobs at a cast and crew screening up in City Hall in San Francisco, A Bug's Life. And there he is, there's Steve Jobs. And hi, Steve, nice to meet you. You know, and he says, I'm a big fan of yours. I said, what? A Firesign Theater fan. Well, if you have an iPhone and you say to Siri, this is Worker speaking, hello, she will say to you, hello, Clem, what service can I perform for you? I am Clem, Clem. And it comes off of that album, I think we're all bozos on this bus, which was predicting the computer revolution in 1970, 71. And it inspired him to do what he was doing. I don't know why I wasn't in that movie, you know. Bruce, you probably got the part I was going to, anyway.
You've done so much cartoon voice work too. And I was looking through your credits, and he has been in all of the big ones, but over 200 credits.
Yeah, I'm probably best known for Howard in the Rugrats. If any of you have kids, right? I'm the father of Phil and Lil. But I've done lots of wonderful, fun voices and villains in games and things like that. But the Drunken French Monkey, I am a social drinker. I got the part because I did a lot of research and development to before the first reading. And we did 5 of those movies. It's the Eddie Murphy, Dr. Dolittle series. And the wonderful thing about voice work particularly is you can improvise, you can do take after take and play with the character and play with the things that you're doing, which is, and you don't forget your lines because they're all written down in front of you. I recommend any of you guys get into the voiceover industry. It's a ball. So anyway, I am so proud and happy to be a part of this gathering. And I think we're going to have to come back and sit in this audience and have some more fun with everybody because it's just been wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for doing it. Thank you, Philip. So what did you learn, young man?
That you don't need a background in Westerns to make one.
Maybe to make a successful one, but he went through some trials and tribulations, that's for sure, with ZACHARIAH. But this is early for Don Johnson, too.
Yeah, before he was a star.
Well, Miami Vice came along and rocketed him right to the top of the heap with that influential series that Michael Mann created, Miami Vice. I loved that show, too. It was Friday night appointment television. Don's done some good Westerns as well. We should get him on and we can talk about some of his Westerns other than ZACHARIAH.
Yeah, some that are a little easier to follow.
But Phil was a terrific guest. So funny. I'm glad he came. That was a day. In the audience, we also had Fred Willard and Chuck McCann.
Mm-hmm.
And it was
great, funny guys.
Our theme was comedy that day.
I'm just going through some of his additional credits right now and am blown away that he was in every video game I played growing up.
Like what?
Like Prototype and Assassin's Creed, the first 4 Assassin's Creed games, it looks like, and Crackdown 2 and Star Wars The Old Republic and Call of Duty Advanced Warfare and Batman Arkham Knight. God, I've played a lot of video games.
Well, a lot of money was made on those video games was doing voices on. I wonder if they get residuals on those like they do with movies.
I wish I could give you the answer to that, but maybe on a future episode.
Well, I hope so, and I hope all of you out there had a fun time with us and Phil today.
All right, happy trails, guys.
If you did have a good time, join us next time on A Word on Westerns, the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
If you enjoy what we do here, please take a moment to follow our show and share these interviews with your friends. You can also find A Word on Westerns on Patreon, Facebook, and YouTube. Thank you, and see you next week on A Word on Westerns. A Word on Westerns is produced and hosted by Rob and RJ Word. Edited by Alex Lockett and Boar and Ebor Dro. Location audio is provided by Richard Reagan. Sound design by Alex Lockett. A Word on Westerns theme song was composed by Karel Pasoda with additional arrangements by Shipwreck Music and RJ Word.